The parable of the prodigal son is one of the parables of Jesus. It appears in Luke chapter 15 verses 11 to 32. Jesus shares it with his disciples, the Pharisees and others. In the story, a father has two sons. The younger son asks for his inheritance and after wasting his fortune, becomes destitute. He returns home with the intention of begging his father to be made one of his hired servants, expecting his relationship with his father is likely severed. The father welcomes him back and celebrates his return. The older son refuses to participate. The father reminds the elder son that one day he will inherit everything, but they should still celebrate the return of the younger son because he was lost and is now found. It is the third and final part of a cycle on redemption, following the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. In Western Catholic tradition, this parable is usually read on the fourth Sunday of Lent, while in the Eastern Orthodox Church it is read on the Sunday of the Prodigal Son. Narrative. The parable begins with a young man, the younger of two sons, who asks his father to give him his share of the estate. The implication is the son could not wait for his father's death for his inheritance. He wanted it immediately. The father agrees and divides his estate between both sons. Both the sons asking and the father's granting of this request would have been shocking to Jesus' Jewish audience. Upon receiving his portion of the inheritance, the younger son travels to a distant country and wastes all his money in extravagant living. Immediately thereafter, a famine strikes the land. He becomes desperately poor and is forced to take work as a swineherd. When he reaches the point of envying the food of the pigs he is watching, he finally comes to his senses. But when he came to himself he said, "How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I'm dying with hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and will tell him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no more worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants.'" He arose, and came to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him, and was moved with compassion, and ran towards him, and fell on his neck, and kissed him. This implies the father was hopefully watching for the son's return. The son does not even have time to finish his rehearsed speech, since the father calls for his servants to dress him in a fine robe, a ring, and sandals, and slaughter the fattened calf for a celebratory meal. The older son, who was at work in the fields, hears the sound of celebration, and is told about the return of his younger brother. He is not impressed, and becomes angry. He also has a speech for his father, but he answered his father, "Behold, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed a commandment of yours, but you never gave me a goat, that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this, your son, came, who has devoured your living with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." The parable concludes with the father explaining that because the younger son had returned, in a sense, from the dead, celebration was necessary. But it was appropriate to celebrate and be glad, for this, your brother, was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found. Context and interpretation. This is the last of three parables about loss and redemption, following the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin, that Jesus tells after the Pharisees and religious leaders accuse him of welcoming and eating with sinners. The Father's joy described in the parable reflects divine love, the boundless mercy of God, and God's refusal to limit the measure of his grace. The request of the younger son for his share of the inheritance is brash, even insolent, and tantamount to wishing that the father was dead. His actions do not lead to success, and he eventually becomes an indentured servant, with the degrading job of looking after pigs, and even envying them for the carob pods they eat. The mention of the son's longing to eat with the swine in Luke chapter 15 verse 16 could refer to how the Pharisees viewed include the sinners in Luke chapter 15 verse 2. The Pharisees, caught up in their ideas of ritual cleanliness, might have thought of these people as filthy pigs. On the son's return, the father treats him with a generosity far more than he has a right to expect. Some have suggested that this mirrors what Christians should do after sinning: feel contrition and return to the Heavenly Father, who will graciously welcome them back. The older son, in contrast, seems to think in terms of law, merit, and reward, rather than love and graciousness. Quote, "He may represent the Pharisees who were criticizing Jesus. The Father, who represents God, implies to the elder son that his love for both sons is not dependent upon the performance, but the proximity, or closeness, with the Father." Commemoration and use. Orthodox. The Eastern Orthodox Church traditionally reads this story on the Sunday of the Prodigal Son, which in the liturgical year is the Sunday before Meat Fair Sunday and about 2 weeks before the beginning of Great Lent. One commentary on him of the occasion reads, Catholic. In his apostolic exhortation titled Reconciliatio a Penitentia, Pope John Paul II used this parable to explain the process of conversion and reconciliation, emphasizing that God the Father is rich in mercy and always ready to forgive. He stated that reconciliation is a gift on his part. He stated that for the Church her mission of reconciliation is the initiative, full of compassionate love and mercy, of that God who is love. Quote, he also explored the issues raised by this parable in his second encyclical Dives in Misericordia issued in 1980. In the art of the 30 parables in the canonical Gospels, this was one of the 4 that were shown in medieval art almost to the exclusion of the others, but not mixed in with the narrative scenes of the life of Christ. For the Renaissance the numbers shown widened slightly, and the various scenes, the high living, herding the pigs, and the return of the prodigal son became the clear favorite. Albrecht Dürer made a famous engraving of the prodigal son amongst the pigs, a popular subject in the Northern Renaissance. Rembrandt depicted several scenes from the parable, especially the final episode, which he etched, drew, or painted on several occasions during his career. At least one of his works, The Prodigal Son in the Tavern, a portrait of himself as the son, revelling with his wife, is, like many artists' depictions, a way of dignifying a genre tavern scene, if the title was indeed the original intention of the artist. His late Return of the Prodigal Son is one of his most popular works. Stage. In the 15th and 16th centuries the theme was a sufficiently popular subject that the Prodigal Son play can be seen as a subgenre of the English morality play. Examples include The Rare Triumphs of Love and Fortune, The Disobedient Child, and Aquarellist. Notable adaptations for performance include an 1869 oratorio by Arthur Sullivan, an 1884 cantata by Claude Debussy, a 1929 ballet choreographed by George Balanchine to music written by Sergei Prokofiev, a 1957 ballet by Hugo Alfven, and an opera, The Prodigal Son by Benjamin Britten. Many of these adaptations added to the biblical material to lengthen the story. For example, the 1955 film The Prodigal took considerable liberties, such as adding a temptress priestess of Astarte to the tale. Popular music. The parable is referenced in the last verse of the traditional Irish folk tune, The Wild Rover. Oblique adaptations include the by the Reverend Robert Wilkins, who told the story of this parable in the song Prodigal Son, which is probably best known as a cover version by the Rolling Stones on the 1968 album Beggar's Banquet. The British heavy metal band Iron Maiden recorded a song titled Prodigal Son, based on the parable of the same name, which appeared on the second release Killers in 1981. U2 recorded a song titled "The First Time" on the 1993 album Zooropa. While based on the parable, it presents the idea of an alternate ending to the story. It could be argued that Kelly Willard's 1982 song "Make Me a Servant" is based on what the son said to his father when he returned home. The Prodigal Son is the first posthumous release by piano player and gospel singer Keith Green. Detroit musician Kid Rock also recorded a song titled "Prodigal Son," which appeared on his second album The Polyfuse Method. In 1993, Kid Rock later re-recorded the track for his 2000 album The History of Rock. The Christian rock trio Barlow Girl recorded the song "She Walked Away," influenced by the parable, as part of the 2004 self-titled album. Indie rock band Two Gallons covered the parable in the song "The Prodigal Son" on the 2006 album What the Told Tells. Musician Dustin Kensrue wrote a song about the prodigal son entitled "Please Come Home" on the album of the same name released in 2007. Rock band Certain Dust has a track titled "Prodigal Son" on the 2008 album Chapter 7, Hope and Sorrow. The band Bad Religion has a song of the same title on their album New Maps of Hell. The band Extreme recorded a song titled "Who Cares?", which appeared on the album Three Sides to Every Story, which is influenced by this parable. Brantley Gilbert released a song called "Modern Day Prodigal Son." British reggae band Steel Pulse recorded a song titled "Prodigal Son" on the debut album Handsworth Revolution, recreating the biblical story as a Rastafarian parable. The post-hardcore band Gideon released a song called "Prodigal Son," which appeared on the second album Milestone. Christian rock outfit The Chinese Express opened and closed the 2006 release with a two-part telling of the parable with songs titled "Said the Son to the Father" and "Said the Father to the Son." Post-hardcore band Jamie's Elsewhere also released a song titled "Prodigal Son." The Irish rap group House of Pain references the parable in one of the verses of the song "Jump Around." English indie rock band Alt J references the parable in the first verse of the song "Left Hand Free." On the 2015 album Something Different, the Christian band Sidewalk Prophets included an uplifting song titled "Prodigal," with lyrics that are directed towards the prodigal son from the parable, or any person who has felt like they are in a similar situation. In 2006, country artist Dierks Bentley wrote a song for his album Long Trip Alone, entitled "The Prodigal Son's Prayer." The song is based on the son's perspective of coming home after he's ruined himself in the world. Literature Another literary tribute to this parable is Dutch theologian Henry Nouwen's 1992 book The Return of the Prodigal Son, a story of homecoming, in which he describes his own spiritual journey infused with understanding based on an encounter with Rembrandt's painting of the return of the prodigal, and deals with three personages: the younger prodigal son, the self-righteous, resentful older son, and the compassionate father, all of whom the author identifies with personally. An earlier work with similarities to the parable is Le Retour de l'Enfant Prodigue, a short story by André Gide. Rudyard Kipling wrote a poem giving an interpretation of the younger brother's perspective. The parable of the prodigal son is also a recurring theme in the works of Rainer Maria Rilke, who interpreted the parable in a different way to the conventional reading. His version of the parable was not so concerned with redemption and the forgiveness of family, the love of the family, and human love in general, was was seen as less worthy than unreciprocated love, which is the purest form of love. In loving the family less, the son can love God more, even if this love is not returned. The theme of the prodigal son plays a major role in Anne Tyler's novel A Spool of Blue Thread. The prodigal son was also referred to in the play As You Like It, a pastoral comedy by William Shakespeare. The prodigal son is also mentioned in Shakespeare's romance, The Winter's Tale. Similar parable in Mahayana Buddhism. A similar parable of a lost son can also be found in the Mahayana Buddhist Lotus Sutra. The two parables are so similar in their outline and many details that several scholars have assumed that one version has influenced the other, or that both texts share a common origin. However, an influence of the biblical story on the Lotus Sutra is regarded as unlikely given the early dating of the stratum of the sutra containing the Buddhist parable. In spite of the similarities, both parables continue differently after the two meet for the first time at the son's return. In the biblical story, there is an immediate reunion of the two. In contrast, in the Lotus Sutra, the poor son does not recognize the rich man as his father. When the father sends out some attendants to welcome the son panics, fearing some kind of retribution. The father then lets the son leave without telling him of the kinship. However, he gradually draws the son closer to him by employing him in successively higher positions, only to tell him of the kinship in the end. In the Buddhist parable, the father symbolizes the Buddha, and the son symbolizes any human being. Their kinship symbolizes that any being has Buddha nature. The concealment of the kinship of the father to his son is regarded as a skillful means